You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars. Begins now.
All right, everybody, welcome to Head, a Star Wars podcast. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Darryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this podcast. You know, so it's funny, Darryl, I was actually looking around and I saw that The Last Jedi was out on Blu-ray, DVD, you know, basic home video release, digital. Mm-hmm. And it had occurred to me, there's so many, you know, features and everything on the DVD menu. Pretty much. Like, whenever you just access it, like, you see just all these crazy features. And it just got me thinking, like, do you actually go in for all those features?
Actually, yeah. Like, after I watched the movie probably a couple of times, you know, sometimes I do take the time to look at some of the features because it's cool to actually kind of see what they're talking about as far as how they came up with certain characters or the story arc or the technology that they brought into the film. Hearing the director's thoughts, where was his mind at in that particular moment? The cast members, and especially, you know, unfortunately with The Last Jedi, you know, that's the last time we actually get to see Carrie Fisher alive. So I'm just always curious, like, did they put anything in there dedicated to her? So yeah, the special features are really cool. I like watching them. It just furthers my Star Wars knowledge, and I really do get a chance to enjoy them, and they also kind of give me the behind the scenes from the visual standpoint, especially with us being videographers. You know, we get to see the cinematography, how they came up with certain things like that. So it's really interesting for me.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the same thing, basically. I mean, I think Star Wars actually sets the standard.
Absolutely.
For, you know, basically extra features or special features on DVDs. Because, you know, you look at the prequels.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just amazing, all this stuff. I mean, you literally feel like you've just made the movie with them.
Yeah, it's a cool journey because you get to see, you know, the detail that they put into it, especially now that they've gone back to using practical effects and things like that now. So going from the whole CG stuff from the prequel area, and that was just massive on that end, but then now with the whole real life feel from The Force Awakens and now Last Jedi, and of course upcoming episode 9, you know, there's going to be a lot of things and that we get to see how they created these moments, just like we did with the original trilogy.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, the original trilogy, I mean, that even they went back and, you know, through subsequent releases, actually bulked those up.
Yeah,
you know,
definitely.
So, I mean, it was like you can actually see a lot of different things. And then, of course, they have all the books and stuff that chronicle the making of these films. But, yeah, I mean, for me, you know, it just depends. Like, sometimes, I don't know about you guys out there, but sometimes I just want to watch the movie. Like, I don't even care about the feature. Like, because sometimes, you know, with Netflix, they'll only give you, I noticed they started doing this lately, they only give you the rental copy.
Oh, okay.
Which is basically like a featureless, you know, DVD or Blu-ray or whatever. It only has the movie and that's it. Okay. And, you know, occasionally I'm fine with that. But for me, it also depends on what's on there.
Right.
You know, I do actually sometimes like to go back and watch the commentaries. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes back to what you were saying. In fact, I remember with the prequel trilogy in particular, or no, actually, you know what? It's with all 6 of them. Oh, the original, the prequels plus the original trilogy, where Lucas actually did his own commentary. Mm-hmm. And it was cool because there was a lot of fan questions that, you know, of course we all had.
Right, that he answered.
And that he actually answered.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
There's still one. And you know which one it is.
Yes, I do.
I still want to know, what did they talk about in Empire Strikes Back in that dinner scene? You know, Vader's all like, we would be honored if you would join us. And then, you know, the door shuts, and I'm like, okay, did they just sit there and have dinner?
Probably who made the potato salad. That's
right. You know, I mean, I can't see that, but that was one of the quirks. But I really, really enjoy, you know, the DVD menus and.
But did Vader even eat?
Because the menus like that, right? Because the menus, even the DVD menu design is phenomenal, and I mean that's something that, you know, as a production guy too, I really appreciate when it's not just the content, but it's the menus themselves. Mm-hmm. You know, how creative and inventive they are. And I know it's kind of like a lot of people probably don't care about that, but for me,
oh yeah,
you know, I really enjoy just that extra attention to detail.
Because we know how much time it takes to create those things.
Well,
We've created menus ourselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just the detail that they put into that is like ridiculous.
Absolutely. All right, well, it is time now for our segment called The Cantina. Now, The Cantina, for those of you, because we are a relatively new podcast here, The Cantina is basically our general discussion, current events in Star Wars, kind of our news segment. Because, again, we're not really trying to be a news-oriented podcast. We're kind of like, okay, as Star Wars fans, we hear the news from Disney or other, more news-oriented podcasts, and we're fans that are reacting to the news much like you guys are.
Yeah, so the first one up, and this should be a good one for you, Eric, because it's dealing with your favorite character out of the movies.
Oh, yes.
The Han Solo movie. Success or failure? Your take.
Well, obviously, they consider it a box office failure. Because you have to look at it from the standpoint of it isn't just because a lot of people say, look, it made a really good amount of money, and it did, but it's what they actually spent on it, versus what they got back that was disappointing. And that's really what they say. It's more of a disappointment. And it's also the first Star Wars movie ever released that didn't just kill it at the box office.
Right.
So it does have that distinction. But for me personally, I think it's a success.
So what did you really get out of the movie that, since that's your favorite character, what's something that you really got out of that movie that you may not have had prior knowledge to before?
Well, obviously, the answer really is Han Solo's origin. Because that's always been hinted at. Like, we've always known in the movies that he's a smuggler. There's little things, the comics and even some of the canon novels have actually hinted a little bit to what his origin was. Now, of course, coming up, they had the novel Last Shot. They got another one coming up. Title escapes me right now, and they're starting to fill in Han Solo's gaps a little bit. But we've always had some basic knowledge of his origin. But the thing is this movie actually defines it now. Like the Kessel Run. We now know what that is. We actually know what that is. Right. And we know, what it looked like and everything about it. Whereas we knew about it, but we never actually saw it. So now we've seen it. We saw where he came from. Now, of course, whether people actually like it or not, because there's a lot of people out there, and you guys, write to us, leave something in the comment section telling us, if you agree with our assessment. We haven't heard Darryl's yet, but, whether you guys were satisfied with it or if you're one of the people that actually feels that it was better left a mystery. Because there's a lot of people out there that really think that they shouldn't have even made this movie.
Yeah, I think the movie to me was a success. Han Solo is a very complex character, and you get to see that in this movie because you see the lighthearted side of him. You see the smuggler, the charming swindler kind of side, but then you also kind of see more of a tender side, with the beginning of the movie, for those who saw the movie. Sorry, spoiler alert.
Yeah, just so you guys know, check the show notes on these podcasts before you listen to them because we're pretty spoiler heavy.
Yeah. But, in the beginning of the movie, he has a love interest and, you see that he was really just trying to get back to her because she sacrificed for him. And, you do kind of see that side of him always existed. So you don't get to see that necessarily in the beginning of New Hope until towards the end. But one of the things I did love was to see his interaction with Lando. That was cool. Donald Glover did an excellent, amazing job.
Yeah, he
playing Lando.
Totally stole the show.
Yeah, the whole, Sabbat game thing and kind of understanding how it kind of ties in the story to an Empire. Like, oh, okay, that's what they meant when they made those. So it connected a lot of dots for me. The Falcon, that was really cool because I always thought the Falcon always had that little split in the front.
Yeah,
I never knew it was like, I guess, one big unit.
You know what? But it actually does make sense, especially when you consider that it was Lando's ship. But that's another thing that I thought was a success about this movie, too, is that it actually shows that, Han Solo had an innocence about him, like almost a naivete back then. Mm-hmm. And he started getting a little bit more cynical as time went on. But, in this version of it, it's sort of like half and half, and you see how he developed some of that cynicism, some of the betrayals that are happening. Things like that. You could see like where he started out and where he ended up. And where he ended up was a little bit closer, not quite, but a little bit closer to the Han Solo that we know.
Yeah, and even with Alden Ehrenreich playing Han Solo, I think he did an excellent job capturing the mannerisms. And a lot of people were really skeptical about like, I don't believe he's Han Solo. But I really think that he really did capture it. And I think Disney did an excellent job by bringing Ron Howard in to clean up this movie, and he did an excellent job pulling it together and making a really good movie where you got the comedy, but you had serious moments. You had a lot of different undertones in that movie, and you really got to see the depth of a lot of different characters. Of course, Han, and Lando, and then the whole twist at the end, like the whole villain. Yeah. Being actually like the heroes, I thought that was cool. I was like, wow, I didn't see that coming. So I thought that was really cool. So that was dope. But I loved it. I think it was an excellent movie. I know it didn't do as well at the box office, but I think for Star Wars fans, and especially the younger generation who are getting to experience Star Wars and learn these characters that we grew up on, it closes.
It just fills in the information. And again, I can understand. Like I've watched a lot of Star Wars shows. Of course, both of us are big watchers of the Collider Jedi Council, and
Definitely.
All the people that have commented on that. I mean, I can see why their arguments for why maybe it wasn't a great movie, but I still think that it was the movie that it needed to be. And even with any of the problems that it has, and I mean, let's face it, it has some issues, but I think overall, especially when you consider that, they shot like 80% of this movie and then changed directors.
Right.
That was really an issue. And, speaking of changing directors, the Han Solo movie is not the only movie that changed directors midstream.
Yeah. As we're approaching episode 9, we just wrapped up Last Jedi, and that's in the bag. But now we're on to 9, and they announced that J.J. Abrams is back doing it again.
Yeah, he's back again. Colin Trevorrow is out because he's yet another director in the long list of directors that have done something that Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm didn't like. Mm-hmm. And so, they brought back J.J. Abrams.
Which is really interesting because he's kind of known as a starter of franchises, but not really the closer or the finisher.
Not somebody that closes stuff well. And that's actually one of the things that everybody has been saying that, they're unsure.
Yeah, but he introduced us to this whole new world with, Rey and Finn and Kylo Ren and all the Snoke, all the other, and then the First Order, and that's this whole world that we're in now. And then now Rian Johnson, picked up the ball and gave us Last Jedi. And so now with JJ coming back to close it just, a lot of people have mixed reviews even on The Last Jedi. So some people are wondering, can JJ save it? Because some people thought that Star Wars needs to be saved again. Mm-hmm. Or, if he's really going to take it even further down. So,
you know what? I mean, personally, for me, I actually think that to me, that was the best news that they could have come up with. I love the fact that J.J. Abrams is doing this.
Okay.
Because for me, it bookends it. It's kind of like you said, he's the one that introduced us to this new version of Star Wars.
Right.
This new era, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I think it's only fair that he should be the one to close it out. I mean, you could even make the argument he should have just done all three of them, but I mean, we're gonna get to The Last Jedi a little later, but but basically, I just think that JJ really, and in speaking of that, like you said, that there were a number of Star Wars fans who were not happy with The Last Jedi and didn't like the direction that it went in, or any of that. And I think that some of the criticisms that people had about episode 7, which was it was a little derivative, it was too familiar. I think people want that again.
One thing I've realized about Star Wars fans that we were always looking back to the original trilogy.
Yeah,
and
true.
And we can't do that. We can do that, and that's even in life. We're always constantly like, well, back in the day we used to do this, but we always have to be in a state of progression. And I think Rian Johnson did a phenomenal job. And like I said, we'll talk about Last Jedi soon, but I think that JJ has some work to do because Rian Johnson took Star Wars into a completely different direction in places that, people didn't think that he would take it to, even from their own cast members of Mark Hamill. Like, he even just like, wouldn't do this.
He was notoriously unhappy at first. I mean, in all fairness, Mark Hamill did come around and he understood it, but I think that, Mark almost spoke for the fans.
Right.
But I mean, and we keep saying this, we will get to that later, but JJ does have his hands full, because he has two problems. One, he has to try to undo any damage that was done from The Last Jedi, at least in the eyes of fans. And then the second thing he has to do is he has to tie everything together.
Yeah, and he has a difficult task, especially with the passing of Carrie Fisher, because she was supposed to be have a pivotal role in this movie.
Yeah, this is supposed to be her movie. I mean,
right, so,
Force Awakens was the Han Solo movie, and then Last Jedi was Luke Skywalker. This is supposed to be the Princess Leia featured movie.
Right, and so with the unfortunate passing of Carrie Fisher, now he has to reconstruct his plan probably, and still have things make sense. His characters have to end somewhere.
Yeah.
Or do they? You know what I mean? That's the
thing too, because they've actually announced, now Kathleen Kennedy was kind of off the cuff, but she had talked about, what they were going to do beyond 9. And she mentioned, Kylo Ren and Rey and Finn and Poe and all these other people that were actually going to continue on. So on one hand, you got to look at that like, okay, are you basically revealing to us that they survive episode 9?
Right.
Because number one, that's a lot of people surviving.
True.
And secondly, I mean, talk about spoiler alert.
Right.
And I mean, it's kind of one of those things where, JJ now has to tie up not just this trilogy, but really episodes 1 through 9, because it all, culminates into this one final moment. But then he also, as you're pointing out, has to now tee off a possible episode 10, 11, whatever they want to do beyond that.
And to that point, that brings up our next topic of, Rian Johnson.
Yeah.
His next trilogy, because he's already been commissioned to do another trilogy on his own. So are those characters going to make an appearance? Are they going to have a pivotal role? We all got surprised, with Yoda in 8. So, we know probably someone's going to die in 9.
Yeah, I mean, it's inconceivable to me that everybody would survive 9.
Right. So now what's next? And is it going to leave us in a cliffhanger? Because is there going to be another?
Well, but here's
episodic?
The question, though. I mean, besides that, is there going to be another episodic
trilogy,
like saga trilogy or not? Then you have to ask yourself, okay, is Rian Johnson basically doing that? Is it something completely unrelated?
Right. Yeah, it could be Old Republic.
Absolutely.
It could be just something we've never even touched before.
And hey, on our brand new audience that we're gaining, what do you guys think?
Right.
You know, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, give some your speculations of what's coming up.
Nice. Be cool, but yeah, we do want to hear from you. Give us some speculation. Give us some ideas. We might even feature it on an upcoming show, because this, I mean, there's a couple other things, that they're constantly announcing new things every day, so you never really know what's coming down the pike. But we know about this Rian Johnson trilogy, and it just amazes me that, they gave this guy an entire trilogy before the movie was even released.
Yeah.
Kind of makes you wonder if they're second guessing that now.
Well, I mean,
and that is exactly what our topic is.
Yeah, because that's the whole, gist of the matter is that you're giving him a whole new trilogy, but a lot of fans weren't happy with the way the Star Wars franchise went in Episode 8.
Yeah, and he's the guy that brought it there. So I mean, what's your take on it? Do you think that? I mean, because how do you backpedal on that? You just handed this guy not a movie, but an entire trilogy. I mean, how do you even say that? Hey, man, about that trilogy.
Yeah, I'm going to need that back.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, you didn't cash that check that we gave you by any chance.
Yeah.
I mean, it just blows my mind that you would even do that. I mean, and it just shows you, too, how much they must have loved The Last Jedi when they saw it.
Well, yeah, and I think the problem is that, once again, like I said, we've gotten too familiar and too comfortable in the Star Wars galaxy because we're never satisfied because on one hand, we want everything to look the way that it did in the original trilogy. But then if you do that, that's what they crucified JJ for in 7. Like, Oh, it's too much like Episode 4 and it's too much like A New Hope. And, we wanted something different.
You're just rehashing the same old thing.
Exactly. But then you get Rian Johnson who takes it in a completely different direction and gives you tons of depth and character development in 8 and takes us on some new twists and turns. And then now people are like, oh, well, we don't like that either. So it's...
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to like, okay, first of all, basically everybody's biggest issue has always been, even when they were speculating about what an Episode 7 could be. I mean, this is even before, like the Legends novels are still expanded universe, right? Disney sale hasn't happened. And everybody's like, well, we wish that somebody can come along and take Star Wars in another direction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if you really stop and think about it, it's not as if Rian Johnson really took it in that drastic. I mean, we can look at it in our review of The Last Jedi, but I mean, it's overall, when you just look at it, it wouldn't be that hard, I don't think, to bring it back.
Yeah, I think some people wanted the best of both worlds from the original and the prequels. I think they wanted more of the story line and the depth of character from the original trilogy, but I think they wanted the action from the prequel.
Yeah, and I mean, that could very well be. I mean, I think the biggest problem is the Luke Skywalker issue, but I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact, too, that what everybody forgets about the prequels, and don't forget, everybody had a lot of problems with the prequels.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And I mean, look, that's another one that I admit I do consider myself a prequelist. I mean, that's a new term, at least that I've heard that's being thrown out there.
Right.
But it's really more the stories. I mean, I admit the execution was a little poor.
Oh, definitely.
But I mean, I think that what people are forgetting about the prequels is that those are filling in, you actually have a template. Mm-hmm. So you can't, even Lucas couldn't really stray too far from that template. And even then people had issues.
Yeah, I think yeah, you're absolutely right in that sense that the stories that were told were actually good. But the execution, some of the acting, dialogue, and of course with the CG, it made it look too cartoonish. So, of course, by Revenge of the Sith, that was the better of the 3, definitely. But it did fill in the gaps. It did, answer some questions from the original trilogy as far as, and you kind of encapsulated like Anakin's story.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that that's why it's an unfair characteristic. Now, where Rian Johnson would take this new trilogy, he could do... I mean, let's do this. Before we close out and leave the cantina, closing time's coming soon.
Last call.
Yeah, last call. Last call for the cantina before we close this out.
No drinking and driving.
Right. Or flying.
Or flying in this case.
But where do you think, what do you think the Rian Johnson trilogy is going to be? Where do you think it's going to take place? If you had to guess.
Well, if it's If it's concerning all the members of this current trilogy, I would say that maybe it would kind of take place almost like the Rogue Ones of between each movie.
Okay.
So
almost like
see okay, how Finn became Finn.
7.5, 8.5.
Exactly.
Or maybe like 6.5,
Right.
7.5, and 8.5.
Yeah, because then you really could see, okay, what Luke saw in Kylo. You can kind of understand, like, not Rey as a little girl, but maybe closer to where we meet her in 7. How her ability to fight, and when she realizes she has these kind of abilities within herself, the struggles that Finn went through. I mean, I think that's an underutilized story, is because, here's this guy, he has no name. He was just kind of just placed in the Empire or the First Order. And it's like, okay, well, he doesn't agree. So where's his conflict? Like, how did that even get there?
Okay, I could see that if this were J.J. Abrams' new trilogy. Because don't forget, J.J.'s the one that created those characters.
True.
I think that Ryan's probably going to want to do his own thing. I mean, if I had to guess, it's actually what I would hope. I mean, it's probably not the case either, but I would like to see it take place in the unknown regions. I would really like them to explore that, because
like the Snoke era, like where the Outer Rim type stuff, or
yeah, well, the Outer Rim is sort of like, kind of outside the central galaxy. The unknown regions is like where the Chiss, Thrawn, all those guys are from, and then even beyond that, you have like wild space or whatever. But I mean, the thing is that, the novels keep pointing out, that Palpatine really felt a presence from there. Yeah, Snoke could very well have come from there. We don't know.
Right.
That's one thing I really do hope they address in 9. It's not that, you need to know every little thing about every character, but, that was kind of a big deal. Again, we'll get to that, Nate. But, in our review. But, yeah, I would really like, because they're setting up, especially in, the novels, the comics, a lot of the peripheral stuff that they're doing in the new canon, it's almost like they're setting up something in the future for the unknown regions anyway. So it would be nice, but who knows? I mean,
yeah, that's possible. I mean, and that would be really cool too. I think everybody would love to see Thrawn, because he's still like one of those favorite iconic characters, just because he's so strategic and calculating and cunning. People would love to see him on the big screen, and who would play him. And I think that would add a different type of danger for our heroes.
Oh, yeah. It would definitely give you a villain that we haven't seen, say, since the likes of Tarkin.
Right. And it's actually someone without Force ability. So it's almost kind of like, he's almost like the Batman of villains, where he doesn't have any powers like Vader or Palpatine or Snoke, but his mind is so...
Actually, that's a good analogy, because he's also a really good fighter.
Yeah, he's a really great fighter.
He really is the Batman of...
Yeah, exactly. So he doesn't have that deep, grovelly voice, but he's more soft-spoken. And
yes, absolutely. Well, all right. Well, that's going to close out the Cantina. We're going to leave the Cantina. We're going to go into our next topic.
Yes, our next segment, which we have entitled Duel of the Fates. This is kind of our face-off questions, where we pick two characters or pick two topics, and we kind of compare them together. So this one is, who's the better sidekick? Our lovable droids, R2-D2 or BB-8?
I'm going to go a little bit controversial and say BB-8.
Ooh. Okay. Explain why.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. And it's because you can make the argument, because R2 was with Luke a lot, but R2 really wasn't a sidekick. If you really stop and think about R2-D2's personality, if you want to call it that.
His programming person.
Yeah, his programming, right? He's really, really independent. I mean, first of all, he started out as more or less like Anakin's droid.
Mm-hmm.
He was following Anakin around everywhere. And, even during the prequels, right? Like during episode 1, he was kind of like his own droid, and then he just sort of, just stuck around, and he didn't really belong to any one person, and then he started sticking around Anakin a lot in the prequels, and then of course by the time of the original trilogy he finds his way to Luke, right. And yeah, he was along with C-3PO, but he kept, he had no issues ditching 3PO, like zero.
Yeah.
He had almost like no loyalty towards him at all. R2 was almost like his own thing, where BB-8 is more like that loyal puppy dog droid. I mean, yeah, he's spunky.
Right.
He definitely has an attitude when he needs to have one. But I mean, in a lot of ways, BB-8 just seems more like an actual sidekick and somebody that I don't think would, leave you in the dust. I mean, granted, R2's not as bad as, say, Chopper.
Yes, Chopper.
But I mean, he's got a little of that in him, though.
Well, I mean, I think for me, it would be R2-D2. And simply because...
this is a true duel of the fates.
Yes. I'll see your droid and raising another one. But I think R2-D2 is a great sidekick simply because he does exactly what a sidekick would do. And he comes through when you least expect him to, or he's always there in the clutch when you need him to. And sometimes our heroes do get over their heads, and it's always, R2 that comes in and he's like that last shot.
Well, but how do you, but wouldn't that make him a better partner though?
Well, that's still a sidekick though. I mean,
well,
like
it depends
Robin,
on how you, well, I guess it depends on how you view sidekick, right? Because,
well, I mean, he's a great side, like, and side by sidekick, I mean, companion, because like a lot of times with BB-8, Poe or someone else had to kind of tell BB-8 what to do. R2 already knew what to do. He understood the mission. He was dedicated to the mission. He knew what he had to do, and nothing was really going to stop him. He was fearless. Like, I mean, the guy, it didn't matter if it was some crazy droids from like episode 3 that was like 12 feet taller than him. He didn't care. Or it was like a little Ewok or something that was harassing him. He'll zap them too. I mean,
exactly. And that's my point. See, because I'm looking it up online right now, right? The definition of sidekick: a person's assistant or close associate. Right. But here's the key: especially one who has less authority than that person. Now, I know what you're going to say. The droids are basically like they're created to serve, and they do have masters.
Right.
And I mean, obviously, all droids have to have restraining bolts at times in order to stick around. So there is a certain amount of independence, and I can hang with that. And normally I would say R2 would definitely be the better one to have around when you're in trouble, because, he's definitely more resourceful than BB-8.
Yeah, definitely.
Without question. Even though, I don't know. I mean, this is why this is a good topic, everybody.
Well, I mean, I think R2, the thing is, in going by your definition, having that authority, is because he, with his experience, is kind of like with experience, you just kind of know what to do. And I think over the course of time, from, the prequels where you saw him side by side with Anakin and watching, and he's used to masters, if you will. There are air quotes there, who go against the grain. You had Qui-Gon who went against the grain. Anakin went against the grain.
Yeah, and you're right. And I mean, once he decided he was loyal to you, he stayed loyal to you.
Yeah, he stayed loyal.
You know what? You won me over.
Yeah. And plus, it's like he had everything. Well,
he was a Swiss Army droid.
Yeah, man, the guy had like every attachment. I mean, he's like a vacuum cleaner, a Swiss Army knife. Yeah. I mean, everything. He was just there.
He is Batman's utility belt.
Right.
All you got to do is pair him with Thrawn, and it'd be unstoppable.
Yeah, he's like, a baby Iron Man. Like, he just has everything in the suit. So yeah, R2D2 definitely for me, and like I said, he's kind of set the stage for a BB-8 too. So
He did, and I mean, BB-8 is obviously the new version of R2. I mean, they were trying to make him different enough because you also had Chopper and Rebels,
and was it K2 from Rogue One?
K2SO? Yeah, but I wouldn't. He's not really like an R2. I mean, he's actually more like a new 3PO.
Yeah, he's more of a...
Because if you think about Chopper speaks that same type
astromech language.
Kind of language. He has a similar shape to him.
Yep. Everyone has like a different model trash can.
Yeah, you know who he actually reminds me of? I can't think of the droid's name offhand. It's another Disney movie too, The Black Hole. Did you ever see it?
No, I'm not familiar.
Oh, man.
I got to check that out now?
You do have to check it out. I mean, it moves a little slowly. It was Disney's first, I believe it's actually their first PG movie. Because everything else used to be like rated G, right? All your cartoons, animated movies, and everything. This is like the first PG movie they ever had, and it was the plot was actually really cool, and they had this really cool, menacing droid named Maximilian in it, but Chopper actually reminds me of. There was like this other droid they found on the ship that they landed on that sort of partnered up with everybody. Mm-hmm. And he was sort of like an older version of the droid that was with the heroes. I keep wanting to say his name was like Oscar or something like that. But that's kind of what Chopper sort of reminds me of. But I think with Chopper, what they were trying to do was make like this really,
attitudinal like version of R2.
Just kind of like R2D2 on steroids or something.
Yeah, just a really crabby, almost like that cranky guy that you love, though. Mm-hmm. That old grouchy kind of droid, like, I don't feel like doing this type thing.
Yeah,
but
it seems like he would kind of betray you if the
stakes were high enough.
The situation was right or whatever, yeah. And sometimes, he comes in at the last minute, whereas BB-8, he's kind of, like, if you use R2D2 as, like, your baseline.
Left and right.
Yeah, BB-8's like the other side. BB-8's sort of like the more, like I said, puppy dog-ish, loyal, version. Even though he could have an attitude too.
Yeah, he was hilarious with the whole lighter thing.
Oh yeah, that was awesome, and he is funny. I mean, I have to admit, at first I was really skeptical because they released the toys obviously before they did anything else, and when we found out about BB-8, I was just like, oh. Now they're doing another R2-D2. I mean, this is just so cliche. But when you actually see it, though, I mean, it's amazing.
And you really do see how important the droids are in the Star Wars universe, too.
Yeah.
And how much levity they add, especially that scene where on the one we always are laughing at from The Force Awakens when Han's like, move, ball.
Yeah.
That's just still like... He wasn't even really doing anything, but just the fact of his presence being there just adds.
And I'll tell you something else. I mean, it was amazing that is actually a practical effect. That the way that thing moves is really the way it moves in reality.
I know BB-8's been like on award shows. They rolled them out on stuff.
It's a technical marvel.
Absolutely.
All right, what's our next topic or our next segment? Why do I keep saying topic?
Our next segment is.
From a certain point of view.
From a certain point of view. And this view happens to be the Last Jedi review.
Ah.
See what I did
now we're
there?
Finally, yeah, I did. That was really clever.
So we're actually going to review The Last Jedi. We know it's been out for a while, but...
yeah, but we're just starting this podcast, so give us a break.
Yeah.
And, I mean, let's face it, The Last Jedi has actually made a pretty big ripple in the Star Wars, universe. Fandom.
Yeah.
So, we really do need to address this. So,
The Last Jedi, directed by Rian Johnson. It picks up directly after The Force Awakens.
Which is interesting because it's the only Star Wars movie that does that.
Exactly. It's like the Halloween movies.
Yeah, it literally is like Halloween 1 going into Halloween 2.
Yeah, and I think that...
well, and you know what? That's how we can handle this. We could start going through like the major scenes. So, okay, we start at the beginning. You know, we finished out Force Awakens. You know, Rey's like dramatically handing Luke, you know, his lightsaber. And then, of course, the credits come up. And then, of course, the opening crawl comes. And now she's handing him the lightsaber. And what does he do?
He flips it over his shoulder.
Flips it over his shoulder. Now, that's the first controversial thing that some people loved, some people hated. You know, what's funny about this movie is you don't really see too many opinions in the middle.
Yeah, everybody's either one side or the other.
They either love this movie or they hate this movie.
And I think that move right there was just really cool because once again, it's something that you don't expect from Luke Skywalker from the last time we left him. So we don't know where he is, and that move right there just kind of set the tone and let you know, like, okay,
this is going to be a different movie.
Yeah, he's not happy, and we need some answers.
See, and that what I loved about that moment, because I know a lot of people were really critical of it, and I understand. Again, I want to make this clear because, you know, there's been a lot of people that, you know, will have podcasts or shows on YouTube or whatever, and they give an opinion of The Last Jedi either way, and instantly the comment sections just
explode,
get really vicious and everything. So I just want to point out, you know, lest that happens to us, is that I totally understand everybody's point of view that does not like this movie. You know, I happen to really like it. There were things that I wish that they would have done. But I think and there were some problems that I had with it too. But I mean, overall, I think that the story that they told, I think that the movie was actually true to that story. And I think that it was a story that was interesting. And going back to this, you know, Luke just chucking the lightsaber over his shoulder, I think the nice thing about that, what that really did was that set up that there was an issue. That this is not the same Luke Skywalker we left in Return of the Jedi. Exactly. Just with that one move, it's kind of like, oh, there's problems. Luke's not a happy guy.
Luke is just really, I mean, he looks different. One, he's got like the longer hair. He's not clean shaven anymore.
Well,
I mean,
he went to another planet. Now, of course, we can talk about all day about how, well, if Luke really didn't want to be found, why is there a map to him and all this stuff? And, you know, again, I mean, these are plot devices that they had to use in order to get from point A to point B. They may not make perfect sense, you know, in reality, but you have to understand, everybody, this is storytelling.
All right.
You know, and I agree. I mean, there are some issues, especially when you see Luke's attitude in The Last Jedi. You really wonder why he left that map. Because even when, you know, because a lot of people at the end of 7 were like, well, if he didn't want to be found, why is he leaving a map? And some people theorize, well, maybe that's because if Leia or everybody were really in trouble, he would come to their aid. Well, it's pretty obvious. In 8, he basically flat out refused to go to their aid until the very last moment, of course. But,
you know, we don't know how long Luke had been on that island either. You know,
well, it was supposed to be, let me see, because, you know, I've read a lot of the novels and everything. I think it was on there. You guys can correct me in the comment section if I'm wrong about this. I think it was about 6 years.
Okay, and so like in 6 years, let's just say year 1, maybe he left the map because it's like, okay, you know.
Oh, you're saying that it could have been like a slow...
Yeah, but then as time went on and he just...
Kind of like, man, why did I leave that map?
Yeah, and as time, you know, went on and he started to dwell on, you know, his failures, you know, it eats away at you, you know. And,
but you got to remember, though, he went to that island because of his failures.
Yeah, but I think that at that time, you know, maybe he was like, okay, well, it's still fresh and maybe... in the pinch or something crazy happened, he might have needed to come back. But I think the longer you stay away, it's like you kind of get comfortable.
Yeah, that's true. And, you know, you get, I mean, and plus the more that you're away from human contact and everything, you have a tendency to just want to shy away. And
I think originally he went there looking for answers because that's where the first temple was. And I think
and there's all the books were there.
The books were there, the tree. So I think he was trying to just get himself together. He needed like a little vacation that turned into a completely different lifestyle.
It could be.
So.
All right. Well, that was scene 1.
Right.
Well, this is going to be a long podcast, everybody.
But I think, and I'll just try to move forward, but I think that a lot of different points.
Well, it's all going to harken back to that, because if you look at it, this movie is essentially 2 things. Well, 3 if you count Canto Bight, but it's essentially what's going on with Rey and Luke, and Luke wrestling with
his inner demons, basically.
Yeah, pretty much with his inner demons, his failures, what the Jedi should be versus what they are, at least in his mind. And then, of course, you have what's going on in the ship, where you have this standoff where the First Order is chasing down the Resistance, and it's basically this cat and mouse type of a thing. And then, of course, you also have other things intertwined, because you have this whole thing now going on with Kylo and Rey, and then, of course, Poe, he's learning how to be a leader, right? Instead of just a hero. Right. Because there's a definite difference between just a straight up hero and a leader.
Absolutely.
And then of course you basically have, Finn. A lot of people forget about his story, but his whole story is basically like, okay, where do I fit in all this?
Well, yeah, and I think this whole movie really is about growth. I mean, if you really look at the overarching, theme of this, everybody had to grow up at some point. Luke had to grow beyond who he was and get out of his own way. The same with Poe. He had to learn how to get out of his own way and become a leader. Rey is trying to find where she's supposed to be, so she's trying to grow up.
Yeah, we can't discount her journey because, we never really knew who her parents were. This is another thing we still don't know. Now that JJ is back, is he going to retcon that and actually reveal that his parents really were somebody and that Kylo was lying? Or are her parents really nobody, which I actually hope that they stay with.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like the idea and the concept that they were nobody because, I don't want everything to be, oh, that's who they are. And, that's why they're this way. And, I just think that, some things should just happen, just like life. Things happen.
It would be cool if I admit, now, a lot of people were hoping that she would be Obi-Wan's granddaughter or something. I was personally hoping for that theory of Palpatine's granddaughter.
That was cool.
That, I thought, would have added an interesting twist. But at the same time, I do applaud Rian Johnson for resisting the temptation, because it seems like one of the problems with Star Wars is everybody is linked to somebody.
Right. The 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah, now, and you even think about it. Going back to, Attack of the Clones, right? Obi-Wan goes into that bar. Was everybody in that bar related to somebody in the Star Wars universe?
Right.
It's like there are nobodies in the Star Wars universe. There are just regular, I don't mean nobodies in a derogatory way, but I mean they're not linked to the lineage of one of the major characters.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, one of the risks, and that's why I said I love Rian Johnson, because he took those risks, no matter how great or small. He was taking little risks here and then some big risks elsewhere.
Let's talk about the humor.
Well, the humor of the movie was great, especially one of the opening scenes with Poe Dameron, screwing around with Hux, and just as he's buying time waiting for his little booster thing to charge up, he decided to have fun with General Hux. And even the people on the ship were kind of cracking up at it. So I thought that was awesome. And the humor in the movie was well played. I think even Luke chucking the whole lightsaber over his shoulder was kind of funny in a way, because although it was kind of grim, it was kind of like that funny grim.
It was
so
really well. I remember when you and I saw it in the theater, and remember the gasps.
Yeah,
or it was, and I mean that was so funny. And I mean, who knows? I might have been one of those people that actually involuntarily did that.
Yeah, I know I cracked up because I was just like.
And then that was your second reaction, was to laugh at it. And that's the thing about the humor in this movie for me. this is where I'm actually on the fence. I enjoyed the humor in the movie. I thought a lot of it was hilarious. I just don't know if it was Star Wars. I agree when everybody was like it was more Marvel humor, whereas in Force Awakens, J.J. Abrams kind of nailed the Star Wars humor a lot better. I didn't necessarily... The only where I stopped, though, in agreeing with those who criticize it, is it didn't necessarily take me out of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I mean, there's a lot of things about it. I think one of the reasons why people like the Marvel humor so much is because it's what you're thinking when you're watching these things. Mm-hmm. And the characters are actually saying that.
Right.
You know, like a perfect example, you know, when... You know, Luke is all like, oh, do you feel the Force? You feel the Force? And he's, you know, has that little plant. And she's like, yeah, I feel it. I feel it. He's like, do you do? You feel it? You know, I mean, and I mean, you're laughing because he's kind of making fun of the whole thing in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of what you're thinking, like when you were seeing all this serious training and stuff like that. Because I know if I were a Jedi Master or something, I would mess with the students like that.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, because... You know, people take things so literal. And that's the thing. It's like, okay, we'll reach out. But you also look at from the student's perspective, like, well, you
that's
told
true.
me to reach out.
He was teaching a lesson.
Yeah. So,
but see,
like,
he was doing it in a Luke Skywalker way. And what I loved about it was he was owning it. I think one of the coolest things about The Last Jedi was we actually got to see, well, what would Luke Skywalker be like in an Obi-Wan or Yoda role?
Yeah.
What would he be like as the wise Jedi Master?
Mm-hmm.
And what I thought was great was that he kind of maintained his Luke humor.
But which I think he kind of got that from Yoda, because Yoda, if you remember, Yoda was totally completely screwing with them in the Empires.
Completely.
So it's because, and once again, it's more of a test to see where you are.
And of course, you know, when R2 did that whole thing where, you know, you ended up showing Luke the old recording of Leia, and he's just like, cheap shot.
Yeah.
You know, that was brilliant, man. I mean, I thought that was just absolutely one of the funniest things. And then, of course, you know, intertwined with some of the humor, we got to see some cool things like Yoda's little force power that we didn't know he had.
Right. Yeah, well, actually, we saw a lot of different force powers from Yoda that most people don't think caught. Like the fact that as a force goes, he could actually physically touch.
That's true, yeah.
Somebody. Yep. Like that was different and cool. And I don't think a lot of people caught on to that. The other thing, we saw some different, and speaking of the force, we did see some other abilities like the whole melding of minds from Snoke to Rey. I mean, was Rey to Kylo, done by Snoke. And even some humor when they could see each other and he had no shirt on. And so she's like, could you like put like a towel on or something? You know, that was kind of funny because you never really had any kind of, I don't want to say sexualized humor, but you know, that type of vibe in a Star Wars movie. So I thought that was different.
Yeah, there were a lot of things different. Now, is there anything, before we wrap up our Last Jedi review, is there anything that, you know, didn't work for you in the movie?
Anything that didn't work for me.
Because I remember when we came out of the theater, it was funny. It was the first time we were kind of silent after a Star Wars movie. I think we're kind of feeling each other like, oh, I wonder if he liked it. I wonder if he liked it. And, you know, you're kind of like, man, you know, that didn't really feel like Star Wars to me.
Well, it kind of, there were some things like, one of the things that didn't work for me was the whole Rey and Kylo battle. Like, I love the part where how Kylo duped Snoke into thinking that he was going to kill Rey.
Oh, that was awesome.
I thought that was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, that was really cool.
But the whole fight sequence between, and I will admit, I did want to see more fighting, but of course I wanted to fit within the story.
Yeah, it was one of those things where, once again, and I think both you and I are in agreement in this, is the fact that there were things that we really would have loved to have seen in 8 where they had the opportunity to show it in 8, but given the story they were telling, it wouldn't have fit.
Right. At first I was kind of like, the whole Luke thing showing up, like, and only to realize that, he was basically doing like the whole doppelganger thing where
that was another really cool force power.
At first I was kind of like, oh man, like
you got to give it to him. That is impressive.
Well, it's impressive when you sit down and think about it, but
yeah, I know when
you kind of like really wanted to see like, once again, Luke Skywalker, of course, do battle. Like you wanted to see him one more time actually be in the moment and wield a lightsaber and not some projection of himself. But I did think it was actually cool because that just showed how powerful he was. The fact that he could project himself where people can touch him and do all these things.
And don't forget, Kylo was attacking him.
Yeah.
And Kylo, he was defending himself. I mean, yeah, Luke wasn't really, going on the offensive, but he's projecting himself, from halfway across the galaxy and still fending off a very real opponent.
Yeah, all while floating, mind you.
Yeah, and of course you do have to. It's kind of like you said, though. You have to think about this.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. Like when you in the moment, you're kind of like, oh man, you really wish it was Luke. Especially like when they start running all that like firepower on him at the beginning.
Yeah,
and you're thinking that he's just absorbing, and you're just thinking like,
I kind of wish he had been.
And that's what I'm saying. Like that moment, you kind of wish it was actually Luke Skywalker just being that powerful in that moment. Where
isn't that what is great though about this movie in a way that I think a lot of fans that are critical of it are missing, is that this is one of the first Star Wars movies that you really have to think about. Yeah,
and it requires a lot of thought, and it gives a lot of enlightenment to a lot of different things. And one of the things I can say that I love, and that's why I was so happy to see Yoda show up, is because Yoda to me gave like one of the greatest lessons in that movie. And it's like, we're so caught up as teachers or adults, and for those who have children, everybody is so focused on the success of something that you forget to teach the kids your failures.
Right.
And your failures help make you successful.
Yeah, and it was kind of cool, too, because it's obvious that Yoda had even grown past his own failures.
Right.
And I mean, I think that was kind of cool, too, because what I liked about Yoda being in it was like an epilogue to Yoda's story.
Mm-hmm.
We actually saw a little continue. And it was also nice to see, 30 years goes by in these films, and you get to see Yoda and Luke kind of reunited, and now Yoda gets to see the older Luke, and you get a little bit of that banter still, and
and he still was able to put Luke in his place, so that was cool.
I mean, about the only thing that, besides, some of the things that we mentioned, the Canto Bight storyline I could have done without. I think that they could have cut that out, or at least handled it differently.
Yeah, what a waste of Benicio del Toro, man.
That too, yeah. His character... I mean, I will say that I didn't hate his character like a lot of people did. I just think it was underutilized.
Yeah.
I mean, there were certain things, like the little stuttering thing that he did, he improvised, and I thought that was actually a nice touch, but it bothered a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I mean, I agree. It was a waste. It's like, well, why even... You could have had anybody do that.
Yeah, you didn't need Benicio del Toro to do that. I mean, when you bring him in, like, you expect him to be some sort of general in the First Order or some other dark, sinister character, and
in my opinion, they should have had, like, when Maz Kanata, which I thought they were sort of shoehorning her in on the whole thing too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of people said that should have been Lando instead of her, and that would have been a really good way of putting him in there, that he's turning them onto this slicer.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think that Lando should have been the one they were trying to meet. That Lando was the one that had the info, or maybe he had the information on the slicer. That could have made Canto Bight a little bit more interesting, but for the most part...
And it's a place that Lando would be.
Yeah,
anyway.
that totally sounds like, or looks like a place that he would be. But I mean, all in all, to wrap up our Last Jedi review, I think that while the movie did have some problems, and I certainly wouldn't want to see, like every Star Wars film or most of them be like The Last Jedi, I think that was a really nice entry into the series. And I also believe that when episode 9 comes out, if JJ does a really good job on it and he bookends everything, I think it'll actually change people's opinions because it'll put The Last Jedi in a different context.
Right. It gives it perspective.
Yeah, it gives it perspective.
So to close it out, if you had to give Last Jedi a letter grade, what would you give?
Oh, really?
Back to school, man.
Oh, well, let's see. If I had to give it a letter grade, I'm gonna give it a nice solid B. Now, keep in mind, it's actually one of my favorite Star Wars films.
Mm-hmm.
Like, probably in the top 3.
Okay.
Maybe 4.
And we'll get into our rankings.
Yeah, the ranking is a future episode, everybody.
Yep.
But, yeah, I would say it's a B because the problem is the only reason why it's not like an A- or a B+, I don't want to rank it too low, but I don't want to rank it too high because I think that the problems that it does have for me are critical.
Okay.
So that's why. What about you? What's your letter grade?
I think I would have to agree with you on that. I would give it a solid B. I think I love the direction that Rian Johnson took with it. I love the risk that he took. And there are some things that you're kind of like, it didn't work for me. Like I said, the whole Canto Bite scene, the whole Leia thing, which was cool, but it was just like in some ways that was
there is that. Yeah, they could have done the same thing, let her use the Force power or whatever, but handled it a little bit differently. Yeah, I'll give you that.
Honestly, I would have loved if she used the Force to actually stay in the ship. That to me would have been probably more impressive.
Yeah.
But I think that, like I said, I would give it a solid B. It is one of my favorite movies, just simply because of the risk that it took and the direction that it's taken our characters in. We got to see a lot of depth, so I give that a solid B.
All right. What is our next segment? See, I got it right this time.
Good job. Good job.
All right.
So our next segment is Clear Your Mind of Questions.
Clear your mind of questions.
It's that echo.
Yeah. So this is basically questions from you guys. And keep in mind that we do have our Twitter. Our Twitter is up. It's basically head-to-head SW. So it's at head-to-head SW. We also have a Facebook page. You're more than welcome to, send us some stuff there. And you can also, keep in touch with us on either site. So just, send your questions to us. We would love to answer them, discuss them. Again, we're not trying to pretend like, we're these all-knowing guys. I mean, we do love Star Wars. We live, eat, and breathe Star Wars. We consume a lot of the stuff. But both of us will admit that there's probably fans out there that read even more stuff than we do.
Definitely.
We can't keep up with everything, but we are huge fans that really get into the whole philosophical discussions, in case you haven't been able to tell. It's not even so much just about the news and everything that's coming out, but really deep discussions. That's what we really like. So even if it's not a question, if you just have something that you would like us to discuss that isn't being covered in the show, please send us, what do you think of this? Or, what are you guys' feelings on that? So our first question is, was Yoda the best Jedi Master? And this is coming to us from Monica Tienda. She actually sent us a couple of good questions that we're going to feature today. But the first one is, was Yoda the best Jedi Master? Well, before we have to correct this, though. Yoda is actually a Jedi Grandmaster.
Yes.
He's one of the few that's been bestowed on this. Now, you can look it up, probably Wikipedia. Oh, why is that hard to say? Wikipedia actually has some information on this stuff. StarWars.com, of course, really good resource, their data bank. They keep that pretty updated.
StarWars.net.
Well, there's Star Wars Newsnet.com.
There you go.
They're a site that we really like to, we of course look at this a lot, and they're a really good news site, really good. They're a good aggregator of all the news that's coming out, and they're a really good resource as well. But I do know from, and it's kind of tough to say because you do have the legend stuff now that used to be the expanded universe, and that's where a lot of information came from. So you have to really be careful about what was Legends and what is actually canon, because Disney has, pretty much redefined what canon is. And they basically said, okay, the movies, some of the animated series, anything that Lucas did, and then, of course, any novels or anything that came out, comics, after the sale, basically. Because there were a few things that did come out before Force Awakens, like the really good Kanan era novel, A New Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
That was one. But Yoda was actually a Jedi Grandmaster.
Grandmaster
Yoda. And this is bestowed usually upon the wisest and greatest of the Jedi at that time. So if you're talking about at the time that Yoda's alive, and of course this does cover like almost 1,000 years, the answer is probably yes.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that is a fair assessment, considering that because of his lifespan, it gives him time to actually...
That's true. He can actually, look at how much Luke is, even though, he eventually rejected the Force for a while, but yeah, time is definitely a factor that for you to study and...
Yeah, and ponder. And then, of course, he's seen a lot of different, he's been faced with a lot of different challenges where he can hone those abilities and skills. So I think to that question, I would say yes.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that he's also one of the, few, because remember that a lot of the Jedi of that generation never even faced a Sith before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least until they started popping up all over the place. But
right.
The closest Jedi probably to Yoda's level is probably Mace Windu.
Yeah.
At least to the current stuff, the current people.
Yeah, definitely.
So Monica has another question.
That she does. Monica also asked, besides Darth Vader, who else was lured to the dark side?
Yeah, so to the dark side. Well, that's easy. We know Count Dooku.
Yep, he was actually, and speaking of Yoda, that was his apprentice.
Yeah, that was his apprentice. And as a bonus, what was Dooku's Sith name?
Oh, Darth Tyrannus.
Yes.
Darth Tyrannus was Count Dooku's Sith name.
So he was one. Actually, Quinlan Vos in the novel Dark Disciple, he turned to the dark side temporarily, but it was his love for Asajj Ventress, of all people, who actually brought him back, which is a really interesting, if you haven't read Dark Disciple, I can honestly say that's one of the best of the newer canon novels that have come out. I mean, there's a bunch of them, Lords of the Sith, great one. Lost Stars is a really, really good one. But Dark Disciple is just, I can't even say enough about it, so I won't say anything else.
Wise move.
Yes. Now, who's our final question?
The final question comes from Dwight Tarrance, and his question is, how does anyone understand R2-D2 or BB-8?
Well, this is great because it's the return of R2 and BB-8, as if we haven't discussed them a lot on this show.
Well, I do know that, and if you look at the original trilogy, even took Luke Skywalker a minute to kind of understand some of the beeps and boops and all that stuff.
Well,
they had like a little computer screen.
That translator.
Yeah, that kind of.
But it's like anything else. It's another language.
Yeah, and I think that if you're around it enough, you kind of understand. It's almost kind of like, I kind of liken it to a parent, like when you have a child, when they can just cry, what certain cries mean.
Or a pet owner, right?
Yeah.
If you have a dog or a cat, the way that they growl, bark, meow, whatever.
Chirp.
Yeah, chirp. It's like you can begin to decipher. Yeah, and like you said, a crying child. But there is legitimately, though, it is a language. There's the language that astromech droids speak. There's Bocce.
Yeah.
Right? There's different other, languages that various machines speak. That's why, protocol droids had to know all those languages because they had to decipher everything.
Right.
Or talking to the Falcon, remember?
Yeah. Well, you ever wonder, do droids come with, user manuals? Like, is there like some, okay, if it beeps this way or if it just turns red, do you...
Well, I mean, my whole thing is like, do they actually have like a troubleshooting guide? I mean, and then in some of the novels that, we have is like, okay, if my droid suddenly, if like my protocol droid is trying to kill me in some way,
right.
Is there like,
some little deactivation switch?
Yeah, do I, upgrade its firmware? Do I, is there like a factory reset on this thing?
Do you have to update it like your iPhone?
Yeah.
So, those are the questions for today. And
I think that's our show for today.
Actually, it is.
Yeah, this is our show. So remember, everybody, look for us on Twitter at head-to-head-SW. Same thing with Facebook at head-to-head-SW. And, send us our questions, comments. We would love to hear from you. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. Make sure you like us on Facebook. And, look for us in other media soon.
All right, man. Well, I've had a blast. This was really cool. Always a pleasure talking Star Wars with you, man.
Of course, man. I mean, that's why we do this. We do this because, you know what? We have such a great time talking about Star Wars, and people have said, you know what? You guys should have your own show. And you know what? We said, you're right. So it's always a pleasure talking Star Wars with you. So I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Darryl Sanders.
And we'll see you next time.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at head-to-head-SW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at head-to-head-swpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.